Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Deering Live. It's been a while since we've been here, it feels like, but we're glad to be back. And this week, really excited. We have Enda Scahill from the band Banjo 3, fantastic Irish tenor banjo player, um, and a fantastic teacher. So I know we're gonna learn a lot, and it's gonna be fun listening to him play as well. We just got back from IBMA. I wasn't there, but Jamie Laddie was there, and Janet Deering was there. Hank Smith was in the booth a lot, and we're glad to see everybody in person. Hope you came and said hello. And um, as well, there was one more thing, but we'll get to it later as it just dropped my mind. But with that, I'd like to bring Enda in. Hey, Enda, how you doing?
David, how are you?
All right. Oh, I just remembered the thing. Jamie wanted me to plug the t-shirts that we have. That's,
Get rid of me, put on the t-shirts. I'm all about the merch.
well, we've got Deering Live t-shirts. That's what I was supposed to talk about. But anyways, and it's great to have you here.
It's good. Can I have a Deering Live t-shirt?
Yeah, we'll get one right out to you. Just after we'll get your size after the show.
Yes, I'll wear it with pride.
So you're at home in Ireland right now, right?
Yep, I live in Galway City. Been back off
Okay.
tour for the last couple of weeks.
And are you going out anytime soon, or do you have a nice resting time at home for a bit?
So 2 weeks time, we're gonna have the last two US shows of the year. So we're gonna be in Frederick, Maryland, at the Weinberg Center, and then we're going to play. What is it? The Outer Banks Bluegrass Festival in North Carolina, which we've never done before, and that sounds amazing. So we're closing that festival on the Saturday night.
That should be good. That should be a lot of fun. I haven't been there. We sponsor it, but I haven't been there myself. So I've seen pictures. Looks great.
It looks amazing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you want to kick off the show with a tune?
Sure. I've no idea what I'm going to play, so I'm just going to start playing and see what happens.
All right.
I had loads of time to practice, and then I just panicked. Give it a rattle at the end. Effect.
Fantastic. What was that called?
I think it's Toss the Feathers, but it could be. I'm pretty terrible with names. I'm good at some names, so I'm good at the names that I remember, and then the other ones. And the
All right.
crazy thing with Irish music is that lots of the tunes have multiple names, and they're like really different names.
It's not just like, a little variation of the name. It's a fully different name.
Yeah, yeah. So I did a tune recently, which I've always known as the Primrose Vale for
Yeah.
25 years, and it's one of the ones that I said I definitely know the name of this tune. Everybody else knows it as the Lark on the Strand. So like, there isn't even a floral similarity between the two.
Right, right. Yeah, I've run because the Scotch Irish connection. I've run into that in uh, Appalachian fiddle tunes, which are often based off of a Scotch Irish tune.
Yeah.
Um, is there a variation? Do these names change in different regions of Ireland?
I think so, and I think what happens with them as well in the modern setting is that, you know, they have associations with maybe the people that wrote them and their name, and then there's people who play them, and there's associations with that. And some people just make up names for them as well, you know.
Yeah.
But definitely you'll have regional, because you'll even think of the Tamlin reel, which like is a really famous Irish reel. And so it's equally as well known as the Glasgow reel. So Scottish people will know it as the Glasgow reel, Irish people know it as the Tamlin reel. The very same tune, but with two very strong names, as in widely recognizable as both names, which
Yeah.
makes loads of sense.
And what's the stylistic? Are there stylistic differences in different regions of Ireland, or versus Ireland versus Scotland, or?
I mean, on the banjo, probably not, and only because it's not that long in the tradition.
Uh-huh.
So there would be absolutely very definable stylistic differences between, we'll say, Donegal fiddle playing, which is a whole thing on its own, and Sligo fiddle playing, which is very, very readily identifiable. The same would be true even if you take the county of Clare, which in an American context is like two sides of a town, right? Because County Clare is not a huge county. But there'd be a very significant difference between what East Clare fiddling is and what West Clare fiddling is. And so this goes back to the time when there was lots and lots of music and there wasn't a lot of travel. And so styles built up, 20 miles apart that were very, very different. The banjo's kind of different because the banjo didn't turn up in Irish music really in a mainstream sense until the 70s and the 80s. And so you're then into that part of Irish music where you have tapes and you have CDs and you have travel. So people are moving all around the place. So banjo didn't get the same opportunity to become established in a geographical area where you could say there's Galway banjo style and so it's more associated with people. So you would have a John Carty style of banjo playing. You would have a Jerry O'Connor style of banjo playing, and so it's more identifiable by the people who played it, as
Got
opposed to
it.
regions.
Yeah, because it's a smaller pool, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's very widespread now. Like there's
Yeah.
tons of banjo players in Ireland, and phenomenal quality, and particularly in the younger ages, they're all masters now.
How did it come into Irish music if they're so recent, in such recent history, and really blossom so quickly?
I mean, the story that Mick Maloney tells is that the Virginia minstrels in the 1850s, when they traveled around the world from the US, that there was an Irish banjo player. And so that's the first time that the banjo is recognized as having turned up in Ireland. But curiously, for it to become established and maybe recognized in Irish music, it had to travel back to the US. So back at the turn of the last century, in the early 1900s, you had Irish musicians that emigrated to the US. And they became established in the New York and Boston recording scenes. So you had the likes of the Flanagan brothers were probably the most famous. Mike Flanagan was the banjo player, and he had a Paragon banjo, which is a very famous brand of banjo, as you know. And so those guys recorded in New York and became household names in the Irish music scene. And those records, I guess, at the time were sent home to Ireland and people listened to them. And then there's kind of a gap in Ireland until Barney McKenna turns up in the 1960s and starts playing with the Dubliners. And that was really the first kind of recognizable banjo player within the Irish tradition. But of course, the issue with Barney was that while Barney was actually a really great tune player, he was recognized for being in a ballad band, which was doing songs. So if you were to talk about the kind of the strict tradition of traditional Irish music, they would have looked askance at the types at the likes of the Dubliners, because they were singing songs and they were singing ballads, and they were commercially successful. When traditional music at that time would very much still have been viewed as something that was to be preserved, and it hadn't even really gone through the folk revival of the 60s at that stage, where the mass populace of Ireland began to actually recognise and enjoy traditional Irish music. So along come the 70s, and you have Kieran Hanrahan, who's playing banjo at Stockton's Wing. And again, I kind of always think this is curious, because Stockton's Wing, to a certain extent, had kind of almost rock and roll sensibilities, and that they had drums in certain of their songs and electric guitars and stuff like that. But Kieran is a very traditional player, and certainly is now. So you had him, and then you had Jerry O'Connor, who came along in the 1980s. None of those could be very easily recognised as what you would call traditional Irish music. Jerry played in the high-strung tenor tuning. So Irish banjo now is recognised as being in GDAE tuning, which is the lower tuning, same as a fiddle. So it's a kind of an interesting discussion, because you would say being accepted into the kind of the hallowed halls of traditional Irish music, where they, revere the fiddle and the flute and the harp and the uilleann pipes and instruments like that. Banjo was a late comer to all of that, like many generations late. And when it poked its head up, it was doing it in a ballad band, in a kind of an Irish Celtic rock band. And then Jerry, who was bringing in all these other musical sensibilities of African music and bluegrass music, so it was being pushed out as it was coming in, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that has completely changed now, because there was just such a surge of banjo players that just came along and loved the instrument and then started to play in what would be considered a traditional style, which only developed in the 80s and the 90s. And now it's just a kind of a household thing.
You brought up, playing in a traditional style, and these musicians and bands who kind of broke with tradition a little bit and kind of helped grow the music. It's kind of similar to what a little, We Banjo 3 is doing, is breaking the tradition. But how do you, even if you're playing in Irish, Irish music, but you're playing traditional tunes, where can you put like yourself into it and kind of not just play kind of note for note the song, but put, your own personality into it without taking too many liberties and kind of, ruining it,
Yeah. Ooh, that's a kind of a question of like, how long have you got? And how. So there's one of the beautiful things about Irish music is that there's always been huge scope for interpretation and in variation of a tune. And even going back to the idea of having a Donegal version of a tune and a Clare version of the same tune, it will have some subtle differences. And then individual players can put lots of different ornaments and variations and kind of harmonic accompaniments to their own music. That makes it very, very individual, while it's still recognizable as that very simple piece of music, because Irish music is very simple. And I think that's one of the things that makes it most fascinating. And it also means that if you get a session of Irish musicians, 7 or 8 musicians that are all playing, there's a repertoire of music that they will all know. But while they're playing an individual tune, they're all playing a slightly different version of the tune. When it comes to the kind of the tail ends of parts and stuff like that, there will be lots of little differences, but it all kind of works together because of the understanding of where the tune is going. And so a huge amount of that is down to the individual musician, how they interpret the tune. And I mean, that ultimately is what defines a musician's style. And you can recognize, how do you recognize one fiddle player from another fiddle player without seeing them? And often it's because you understand the interpretation that they're putting on the tune, the little twists and turns that they're going to add in at the end of parts or halfway through the tune, and you go, that's Frankie Gavin, that's Martin Hayes, that's John Carty, that's Tommy Peoples. And we just, and I'm sure the same is true in lots of other different genres of music as well.
So what are some of the little twists and turns that you like to do in traditional tunes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And again, this changes all of the time, and it can change if you're hanging out with a certain musician and playing tunes, and you'll pick up little nuances that they're doing and you get pulled in one direction. I mean, one of the things that I do love to do is to take like a very simple tune and then try to create interest. It's almost like creating a story with the tune by playing it multiple times. and how far can you kind of pull the fibers of the tune apart without it not being the tune anymore. And so ornamentation, kind of chordal runs and little variations are the ways that I like to play around with it. So we'll take a tune, the Humours of Tulla, which is literally one of the first tunes that any child would learn, because it's such a simple little tune. But you can turn it inside out, and it's still the Humours of Tulla. So I'm just going to play around with this. The idea of I'm just going to play the tune and then see what happens as it goes along, and just hope that it's not an absolute car crash, and then I'll be saying, delete all that last bit. So I don't know if you can kind of. What I like to have in my mind when I'm doing that is the idea of kind of contrast, so that you'll have a busy part, and then you've kind of quietened it down a little bit, play a bit that's kind of messier or dirtier, and then simplify it. And so when I'm teaching these things, it's the idea of, it's almost like I said, it's like telling a story. You start out with the very simple, and you always return to the refrain, which is the simple melody that somebody went and wrote. So you do have to honor that as well.
Right. You can't just turn it into a free jazz, experiment. It's you have to stick playing off the melody, essentially.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just like, here, play something in the key of D and see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And so some of bringing it into kind of some techniques that I saw you do to kind of, I saw, you did some string bending, you did some double stops, and then there's melodic, improvisation, melodic ornamentation going on. Do you want to talk about a couple of those things?
Yeah. So I mean, the most recognizable ornament in banjo is just the 3-note treble. And there's two ways to do this, and again, I always liken this to, there's the Jerry O'Connor method, which is a really crisp, clean triplet. And then Seamus Egan, that played with Solace, he kind of really coined the dampened or the stuttered triplet, which is of those 3 notes that you dampen 2 of them, which is basically just placing your finger on the string and pressing in for the third one. So it gives you a kind of a more percussive sound. And if you hear Jerry playing it, it's going to be way, way crisper. So I try and use both.
Yeah, that second way is kind of like a funk guitar little lick, like where you'd be kind of muting the string like that.
Yeah, it's a little bit like, the fiddlers who do the single note bow triplets as well. And they tend, because then you're getting that kind of bow sound, it's like emulating that with the, as opposed to doing the finger roll, which is a lot cleaner sounding.
Yeah.
So with banjo, I feel I'm always kind of pulling from other instruments as well, you know. So that's the basic one note triplet or treble. And you know, the slight elongation of that is to use a combination of notes. So it's kind of, you're running up into notes and running down out of notes. So just to kind of roll back on it a little bit, one of the things that I found that banjo playing in general suffered from over the years was this very heavy-handed kind of metronomic playing. And it's a combination of factors, a lot of which it comes down to kind of maybe poor technique or a lot of right-hand tension. And sometimes the banjo was associated with, you know, somebody arriving into a session and going, you know, and it was like really, really stiff. And, you know, so one of the things that I am always trying to do with ornamentation is to create phrases that don't exist on the banjo, right? So I know I'm all over the shop now.
No, that's good.
When fiddle players are playing a reel, there's a natural phrase is created when the bow changes direction. And the same is true for a flute, because they have to take a breath. And so I remember as a kid looking at the notes for a flute, and it was like breath was written. Take a breath here, take a breath here. And it wasn't at the same place every time. And so there was a natural pause that happened in the tune. And the same is true even of button accordion, maybe to a lesser extent the concertina. It doesn't happen on the banjo. And for that reason, you could play even a simple tune like this. So there's no phrase, there's no pause, there's no, you know. So one of the ways to do that is to use the ornaments. So you're going to roll in and out of corners. And so you're creating that wave, the ebb and the flow of the music through the use of ornamentation. So that's your basic. In terms of the right hand, it's 3/2. It's essentially 3 notes in the space of 2. So that's the basic stuff. Some of the little kind of subtler harmonic things like hammer-ons, they just ameliorate the softness that you're bringing in by doing a triplet instead of just playing all of the notes. So again, it's looking for these little dips in the music. Pull-offs are a little bit different in Irish music because they're quite twangy, and there's only certain places on the banjo that you can do them. And slides, of course, are very handy. But and again, it's all about that trying to move away from the metronomic playing and bring that little pull and the little edge to it. So there's players that use loads of slides and loads of hammer-ons, and their kind of style is very groovy. Scahill Hayden, who plays with the band Four Men and a Dog as a banjo player, always springs to mind when I think about, you know, he's a really groovy player, that he's always kind of he's a big fan of the slides and that kind of hammer-on style, you know. And I guess the last piece then is the harmonies, the harmonic notes. And it's the same outcome, which is that you're trying to create color, you're trying to create interest, you're trying to create that contrast between the simple fast playing and the phrased parts. there's no kind of limit to where you can come with that stuff. There are certain tunes where the setup of the melody will allow you to almost play a counter melody that happens. There's one I always go to. I think it's the Green Groves. This is in A minor. So on one round of the tune to do that, just it creates a kind of a very interesting point in the tune, and it's about bringing a lot of tension into it, and then relieving that when you go back into the first half of that tune, you get back into that big A minor. And I learned how to do all of this just by putting my finger on notes and hitting them and hoping for the best, and if it sounded good,
do it again.
As a 12-year-old who was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And over the years I've kind of learned a little bit about what the chord names are and things like that, but a lot of it is kind of intuitive at this stage.
Well, I know you talked about tension and kind of losing that tension in your playing, and I know you're a big advocate for mindfulness and breathing while you're playing. So if you want to talk a little bit about that and how you can kind of lose your tension.
I'm only laughing because I need it so badly right now. There's a reason they call it a mindfulness practice. It's because you have to practice it. And literally in the last couple of days, I'm like, oh my God, I need to get back to practicing mindfulness again. So I am. I think I was doing it before it was cool and known as mindfulness, and it was a necessity for me because this is a good while ago, like 20 years ago, and I started to develop ferocious pains in my arms when I was playing, and I had no idea about anything except playing really hard music. And I was playing 7 nights a week, and I was teaching, and I had a full-time job, and I was in my 20s, so like you bounce back from everything super fast, and then suddenly I had like shoulder pain and neck pain and elbow pain, and I was like, what is all of this, And so the story is that I went to this lady for some kind of acupuncture energy treatments, because after trying everything else and finding there was nothing physically wrong with me and I didn't have a brain tumor, and she, oddly enough, spotted me on the television playing with Frankie Gavin. And when I went into her the next week, she said, Enda, you hold your breath when you're playing, and that's the reason that you got all this pain. And I was like, what? I've been playing for 15 years. And I was like, what? And so I was so curious, and I went to the pub that night, and I started playing, and I realized that I was taking big, deep gulps of breath, and then I was stretching. And I was straining, and I was trying so hard. And I was creating all of this physical pain. And my elbow had got so bad at that stage that I actually had to largely stop playing for a period of time. So I went to a yoga class, as she recommended. And I stood in the yoga class the first day, and they said, now take a big deep breath through your belly. And I thought I was going to either pass out or throw up. Because I've been holding this for so long, And I went home and I said, I need to learn how to do these two things at the same time. Because as soon as I picked up the banjo, I just immediately tensed up, because I'd now been doing this for years. And every time I went to play an Irish tune, I had just a muscle memory, or whatever they call it. The association with Irish music and the technicality meant that I immediately tensed. And interestingly, this is kind of where We Banjo 3 came from in one sense. Because I said, there must be something that I can play that I don't have an emotional connection to in that way, that it immediately just brings up all of this effort and trying. And so I started just kind of jamming or kind of riffing on an old time. And so it was very easy, it was very relaxing. There was no competitive nature to it because I wasn't trying to fit in a load of triplets and all that kind of stuff. And so I would sit in my room and I would just breathe in and out, and like deep belly breathing. And my wife would come up and close the door after about 15 minutes, you know, as if to say, do you not know any other tunes apart from this?
Right.
And I would get into a completely meditative state. And so I trained myself to breathe and play at the same time. And so when I went to play Irish music, I was caught in this kind of jag between the two. And so then I had to use the training, essentially, and bring it into Irish music. Now, what I didn't anticipate is that my ability to play on a technical level took off exponentially, because now I had removed what I didn't even realize I had, which was all of these barriers to technique through the tension. And so everything became really soft, and suddenly I could play way more stuff and started to experiment with lots of different variations and rhythm and speed and the whole lot. And the other aspect is that when I was playing, and when I did go really deep into the breathing, is that I hit that zone where I was no longer actually playing the music, where I was just kind of observing the music being played. And it only happened a couple of times, and it was so exciting that, of course, I tried to recreate it immediately and made a mess of it, you know. Because I was like, that was so cool, let's do it again, you know. And but that did start my interest in old-timey music and old-time rhythms, because it's so fun to play, because it's just so relaxing. And so that was when I asked David and Martin Howley over to my house, and I said, bring your banjos, and we're just going to jam. And we're having a great time. And we said, well, let's start a band and do a couple of gigs, and, you know, in a lot of ways the rest is history. And then I forgot all about that breathing stuff, because suddenly I'm on stage and I'm standing up and there's big crowds, and, you know, and there's so much pressure and everything's happening so fast. So it's something that I've come back to now recently, which is when I am playing, it's to try and find the space between what I'm thinking about as I'm playing, or actually to try not to think at all if I can. I read the book Effortless Mastery, and I watched a couple of live streams with Kenny Werner. He's in Berkeley, and he teaches the Effortless Mastery course. I'm not sure where this conversation started, but I feel like I've gone off on a massive tangent. But I'm going to keep going.
It's great.
I'm going to keep going. So Kenny, his whole teaching is that once we start to try, our mind gets involved, tension floods in, and the music is gone, and then we're just up here, and no music comes from up here. All the music comes from here, and you can't get to here if you're trying to be good. So he says, if you sit down and you go, oh, right, I'm going to be awesome. I'm going to play amazing music. More than likely, you're going to make a mess, because you've already lost the battle, you know. And so he sits at the piano and he goes, this is the most amazing sound I've ever heard anywhere in the universe. And then he just plays a note. And I was blown away with that. And I was like, wow, I'm going to try that in the banjo. And it was a kind of pretty cool experience, right?
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that I'm trying to teach at the moment, is how to get that distance between the inner critic, which is always out ahead, judging what we're about to play before we even play it. And just to not pay attention to that, and to come back down into the body and trust that the technique that I've worked on and that the tune that I know will get played. And it's interesting, like when I was doing the Humors of Tulla, there were points in that where I was like, right, I should really try to do something cool in this, and that's where my fingers get all tangled up, right? Whereas if I just kind of zone out from that and just get into get into your fingers and feel the music, that's when the cool stuff actually happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this it's a lot. Because I used to play 7 nights a week sort of thing, tenor banjo gigs, and the banjo's heavy. I'd have pains in my elbows, in my shoulder, in my back. I wouldn't want to practice at all because it just wasn't fun to touch it. Um, but then took a lesson with Tony Trishka for fun, and he talked about breathing because Brian Sutton is really big into this, and 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 it's still something I definitely need to work on. But I would always hold my breath, just like you, and
Mm.
and I think it's a very common thing for a lot of musicians, especially when you're trying to play stuff that's a bit above where you're at that point, and you're just kind of pushing yourself. And
Yeah.
but it's something you need to continually do because you definitely can fall back to your old habits and just start tightening up again if you don't kind of
With,
focus on it.
yeah. Without a doubt. And in actual fact, I know for me that when the breathing becomes my main focus, the music just plays itself.
Hmm.
And and like I said, I've had those experiences where I've actually looked down at the banjo and gone, "Wow, who was playing this?" Because what's happening is just so intuitive. Now
Hmm.
it's only happened a handful of times, but it happened when I wasn't thinking about trying to play really well, and
Yeah.
when I was putting all of the focus. And I've talked about this before. It's the main reason that I wear sunglasses on stage when I'm with We Banjo 3. It's not. I mean, yeah, part of it is getting dressed up to go on stage, but it's like if I remove one factor between the music and listening and playing and standing and getting all of those technical aspects right, and the audience. And if I could, so if I remove the audience from my own picture in terms of the stuff that I have to physically interact with when I'm on stage, it means that I can go inside a little bit more and focus on what I'm playing, or not focus on what I'm playing. And bizarrely, when I'm at home here and I'm practicing, I always wear headphones because the sound of the
Practice with the
banjo,
metronome, or just to even just shut out the world.
yeah, shut out the world, shut out the room sound. Because
Yeah.
when I hear the banjo in the room, and maybe it's from years of playing with in-ear monitors and
Hmm.
playing live, loud live music, most of the time I'm feeling the music internally. And I mean that on a physical level, as in
Hmm.
I've got full isolation monitors in, and there's thousands of people in the audience, and the stage sound is insanely loud, and so a lot of it is feel. I'm playing by feel, and so when I'm at home and I can hear the banjo in the room, the inner critic is just straight out in, like, it's 4 beats ahead, kind of going, "Oh, you're gonna mess up that bar." I put these on and I just get into the zone of feeling. And sometimes, like if I'm practicing, if I'm running stuff that I want to improve, I'll put Netflix on the computer and I'll watch that and I'll play. I've heard Ron Block talk about that. He does that a lot as well.
And you can
And
do it while still not just kind of getting sloppy. And
the sloppiness disappears because
yeah.
I'm no longer engaged in the trying
Yeah.
and critiquing process. So that there's a part of my brain that's doing something else,
Yeah.
and that just lets me play, and I can just, and everything gets really slow. And because I'm not hearing it so loudly, everything gets super soft, and that's one of the things with banjo as well, is to play really soft. I read a book by Julie Lieberman called "You Are Your Instrument," and the thing that I took away from the book was that take out your instrument and play it, and give your force a score of 100, and now play at 50, play at 40. You'll probably have the same outcome in
Hmm.
terms of volume and tone and everything.
Right. Right.
And so one of the ways I do that is just by isolating myself from the sound of it.
I mean, I find myself overplaying on the tenor banjo a lot live. I can get into the playing softly and having a light touch, but live a lot of the time I'll overplay because it's an acoustic instrument, especially the single strings. They aren't very fat. There's no sustain, and it's not. It's like you want to this, it doesn't do anything, as you just said, it doesn't really make it any louder. But is there a way to get out of that habit of while you're playing live, of not trying to just like, again, it's the tightening up, and then you're just trying to make it too loud. Just play within your own space rather than to, especially when you're at like playing acoustic setting in like in a bar or something, you know.
I mean, I think what I've done with that over the last number of years is kind of reconciling the role of the banjo within a session, or particularly within the band. So I see it as part of an overall texture, as opposed to a lead instrument that's out in front, and that's kind of leading the way.
Right.
And so from my point of view, I hate to be leading because it's too much pressure, and maybe I can develop a way to deal with that. But currently, I love to play behind everybody else. So I just I sit behind, and I played a session last weekend with a fiddle player and an accordion player, and it's just like I see the banjo's that middle texture. So I don't feel the need to be trying to drive on the tune and to be leading the rhythm and leading everything else, because that just stresses me out, and then I don't enjoy what I'm doing. Whereas I just kind of sit in behind, and it's with the band, it's the same thing. It's just like, Fergal on the fiddle is almost like that lead role in terms of driving. You got Dave who's pushing the rhythm, and so there's lots of tunes in Me Banjo 3 that I don't play all the notes because I don't have to.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because I'm creating that overall textural sound, and so there's a comfort in being able to just kind of relax into that. But if you put me in a room on my own and said, here, play me 4 reels in a row, like by the time I get to the end of the 4th reel, I'm probably going to be pretty tired and stiff and going and hate myself and go, why am I doing this?
Right.
And I'm okay with that now, because I see, like, yeah, if you put me with a really good guitar player, it's almost like I can sit into the mix and just let the banjo be part of it. I don't need or want or have to be kind of out in front, leading the race, because I find that very, very stressful. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to play another tune right now?
Sure. Oh, I got 2 more banjos here, so I might as well.
Sure.
I got one really pretty banjo. So I used to say it was made for TV.
And I'll really be, monitoring your breathing technique during the song too.
God. So this is a Clarine Setanta. It's one of the very first ones that Tom made, and Tom and Finton.
Cool.
It's beautiful. A walnut barrel.
Yeah.
I need to take off the bit of foam at the back. It's a funny instrument because when Tom made it first, the entire banjo was walnut, including the tone ring. And the walnut tone ring did not work. It just made it really muddy. And so there's a maple ring in it now. But
is there a metal tone ring in there as well? It's a maple rim, but is there
maple rim? See, look, I don't even know the names of the things, right? There's a metal tone ring and a maple rim.
Okay.
The walnut rim did not work. It just was soggy, and it made the banjo feel like you were running through kind of wet ground. It was just like so heavy to play. It still weighs a metric ton, because it got one of those big flanges. I've had 4 different heads on it, and this is the one that sounds best, but it's also tuned about a tone or a half a tone below standard.
And is that head a thicker head? It's not a top frosted head. It's
a very thick synthetic skin head. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it with the light there, but it's starting to wear, and some of the fiber is actually coming away off it. So
yeah.
And a bone-in bridge, which it just softened a lot of it, and this is a good few years old, but it's finally starting to kind of find its own character.
Nice. What was that tune?
That one is actually Toss the Feathers. So I have no
Okay,
idea what
Toss
the
the
first
Feathers.
tune I played was. So there you go. The action is pretty low on this, so sometimes you will get a little bit of the fret noise when you hit it kind of hard. But that's one of the trade-offs. Because it's super low, it's so easy to play. Really, really nice to play.
What string gauges do you like to use when you're playing a standard tenor?
Yeah, so I'm using 11, probably a 16 or a 17 wound, 26 wound, obviously, and a 32. I tune my G string up to A.
Right.
I have done for a long time.
Yeah.
So that's why I get away with a 32. If it was a G, I'd probably go with a 34 or a 36. I'm always trying to get as light as I can with strings.
You don't feel that you lose, the fatness or something, or that it gets a little thin sounding ever.
Um, it's been so long since I tried anything else.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but now that you mention it, a few people have said that, and I'd be curious. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to
No,
taking the
I hear
strings
you.
off banjos. I'm like,
There's
can I get another
especially
couple of
when you have
weeks out of
multiple
this?
banjos.
Yeah, so that's what I'm using it, and I use that on all of them. I have a neckfill banjo as well here, which is a plectrum banjo. Technically speaking, and I have the same gauges on that. Now, this I tune this down at a full tone when it's open, and then I capo, and then it's in kind of Irish tuning. But the reason I got this made was very much because of what we were doing with Wee Banjo 3, is that I wanted something that could sound like a bluegrass or a kind of an old-timey banjo and an Irish banjo at the same time, and
Right.
this kind of covers both, So, one of the things we've been experimenting with in the band is trying to bring some of that bluegrass sound or the cross-picking sound into well, not so much into Irish music, but onto an Irish banjo.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll use ADAD, which is kind of like bouzouki tuning. And that gives you that top tone. Haven't done that in a few weeks, so I can feel the rust. I can feel the rust on that one.
It definitely has more of a 5-string banjo, somewhere between 5-string banjo and like a guitar, in a certain way too.
And it sounds amazing within the context of the Wee Bandit 3-tone, but also on stage, and it's just got a Fishman pickup in it. But it has a roundness that really works well on stage. When it's amplified,
Right.
just because of the nature of the banjo. There's a lot more roundness in the mids than there is with your traditional Irish tenor, which is always kind of tilted a little bit more toward that pinky sound, which cuts an awful lot harsher.
Yeah, there definitely is more. Sounds like there's more sustain coming out on that banjo.
Yeah, and that's the trade-off, because you get the sustain partly because of the hugely long neck.
Yeah.
So when it's fully open, it's too big to play Irish music on it.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me
it's too.
anyway. It's just
Yeah,
it's too.
no, you'd have to have enormous hands.
Yeah. So hence capoing, and it's so funny. I had about 6 different types of capo, and then
What is that capo that you're using now? Curious.
that's an Elliott.
Okay, those are nice. Very good.
Yeah, we ran into Bela Fleck backstage at Wintergrass in 2020, and I just said, "What capo do you use?" Because the ones that I have are wrecking my head, because they're just not sounding right. And he goes, "Here, try this one," and I put it on. And the sound engineer Frank was just down the corridor, and he comes straight up. He goes, "What's that? That sounds amazing." And I was like, "That's Bela's capo." He goes, "You got to get one of those." And
Yeah.
so I couldn't tell you what the difference is, but it's huge.
Well, it's
So
nice. Personally, I like those capos that come straight back versus coming at an angle, so it doesn't bend the strings too, and you can really set it without going out of tune so much.
yeah. So this is where I normally play it then, which is
Yeah.
it kind of makes it a sort of a 20 fret.
The scale length is that scale length when you capo it close to your standard tenor? Is it still larger?
It's still a little bit larger, I think. I'll probably catch myself out in the. It is, yeah. It's still.
Yeah, yeah.
It's still
So
a
you
fret,
can
a fret longer.
reaching isn't too hard though.
With effort. I haven't played it in 4 weeks, and I'll notice this when I go back on tour. I'll be like, "Oh, this is kind of," because when I play this all summer, and then I come home and I take up one of the Irish banjos, they feel like a toy.
Right.
In comparison, you know. But there's such beautiful resonance from this that, like, it's. So sometimes I'll kind of be half afraid of it because I know how wide the stretch is. And then as soon as I start playing it, I'm like, oh, I remember why I enjoy this banjo so much, because the tone is.
The tone's good.
Yeah, it needs strings. I think I last put strings on it before a 3-day weekend in Kansas City, so it's had a bit of humidity and heat and lots of sweat.
Right. Well, I know you use a couple different picks from our last interview, and Alan Jones here is asking what plectrum you use.
I would say that I'm close to finding the perfect pick, right? So if Stringjoy are watching, that's a Stringjoy Jumbo Jazz, and that's the 0.6. And if they would make a 0.55, they would have made the perfect Irish banjo pick. This one is awesome, and it's teeny bit too. So I will use this on stage when it's loud, because you just need a little bit extra grist. And when I'm at home, I'll use the 0.5. A teeny bit too soft. So there's a 0.55 that Stringjoy, if they would make for me, I'd be very, very happy, man.
So what are you feeling when you play a lighter pick versus a heavier pick? What's the tonal difference in the mainly?
There's a tonal difference. There's a roundness to the heavier pick. So let's see. This is the 0.5. And this is the 0.6. So there's a subtle difference in the tone for sure. And a lot of it depends on what I'm doing. So if I'm playing very lightly and quite fast, the heavier pick is very useful. But my preference over the years has always been for a slightly lighter pick. And definitely on the Irish banjos, the 0.6 is not as nice. Now, I'm a very light pick holder, so there's no, I'm never squeezing, it's always super light. And if anything, like the weight of my thumb is holding the pick in place an awful lot of the time. And like that's one of the things that I teach. I'm a very big advocate of having good pick hold because it's all about minimizing tension. So like if you're holding the pick like that, almost like a pencil, you got to squeeze in two directions in order to just literally physically hold the pick.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you transfer that to playing, then suddenly all of this is just super tight. So doing it that way reduces the amount of tension that it holds to just to hold it. So they're currently my favorite picks. String, but the only thing with them as well, like, just because of the material, is that like in a 90-minute gig, I go through 3 string joys, and then I just either sharpen them on a carpet or throw them away.
They wear out really, like, yeah.
3 per gig, yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
And they carve like a little hole, like a little groove in them almost, like, or they're just like totally eaten away almost.
Just the pointy bit at the top is gone, and
It's just gone, yeah.
they get rounded out, yeah.
Right. Well, I want to talk about your Patreon page. If anybody's not checked it out, there's a ton of great content up there. And can you just bring that up and talk about how that got started and what's on there and what people can find?
Yeah, so it it started because I ran a series of workshops online this time last year, and so we would watch instructional videos together and then have a kind of a long group discussion afterwards, and it was really enjoyable certainly from my point of view, and I think people got an awful lot out of it. And what came from it was the idea. So essentially, what I'm doing with Patreon at its most basic level is that I'm taking a tune and I'm showing you how to learn the simple tune, right? But then how to incrementally improve the tune by adding in simple ornamentation and then some of the more complicated ornaments that we were talking about earlier in terms of slides and hammer-ons, how to use chords and how to interpret the tune, with major, minor and passing notes and all of that kind of stuff. And then there's always one version of the tune that has all the bells and whistles. And I'm using the website Sound Slice, which means that it's a video of me playing and talking. And then you have the option of having stave, tab, ABCs that run, concurrently with the music. What's happening on it, which I think is fascinating, is that you can have banjo players at every single level that'll go and they'll learn a simple tune. We're doing the Tamlin at the moment. Now, so from my point of view as a teacher, there's a little bit of trickery required in that first part because the fingering isn't as straightforward as what it seems. And so I can create a short video which is just about how to do the finger work for that part. And then the second part of the tune, which I think is really cool. For this one, I just put in a cross-picking section in it, which I'll probably get wrong now because I can't remember what it was exactly. Right. And so that has become a real highlight of that tune because it's something different. It's a bit of a challenge in terms of picking. But what I love about it is that you'll have a player who's not playing too long, maybe only a couple of years, and they'll go and they'll learn the simple tune and they're playing it at the pace that they're capable of at the moment, which might be kind of 60 BPM or what. And next thing they'll come along with the... So it's affording people the opportunity to pick out really cool ornaments or chordal pieces from the complex tune and slot it into the simple one that they're learning. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing, I've kind of got to the stage now where each tune that I do has maybe 6 or 7 individual video lessons, and so I'm talking about certain tunes will have picking techniques that we need to focus on. It's like, if there's a run of ornaments in a that's no longer following the rules for triplets. Now we're into that'll be a tremolo piece. And so it's bringing people's attention to that section. So that's kind of the basic place of, and so I'm trying to pick tunes then that will either challenge a particular type of technique, whether it's picking or left hand fingering. So we'll take tunes that head up to the high B, which is always a breaking point for me and lots of other banjo players, like getting that pinky up onto the top of the E string. And so I'll just give different variations of ways to finger that so that you don't have to do the massive stretch. And there's other ways of getting around it. So we've introduced the ideas of, shifting positions in Irish banjo. I've also created a Discord server, thanks to my 12-year-old son, who was like, "You're not on Discord?" And I was like, "What the hell is Discord?" And so it's very popular with gamers, but for all intents and purposes, it's like a giant WhatsApp group, except it's broken down into different topics. So, like, when I'm on tour, I did a video on how to sharpen your picks on a carpet because I had all of these worn down picks. And so I'll pop that up on Discord, and then that generates a whole bunch of conversation. People are like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you could do that." And it's like, "What picks are you using?" And then we'll do the whole pick discussion. And there's technique videos in there. There's discussions going on about, listening recommendations. Yesterday, one of the guys in Colorado, Matt, put up a whole series of photographs on how he was able to sort out a buzz on his fretboard. So these are skills that I don't have. And so he takes the whole group through how to do that. And I'm like, wow, I learned something from this, It's brilliant. We do monthly Zoom calls. It's either me chatting. Last month we had Jerry O'Connor on for nearly 2 hours just talking about banjo and, brilliant. We've had Seamus Egan a couple of months ago and Damien O'Kane. And then the last piece is that we do a video exchange. So as folks send me a video of them playing every month, and I do a kind of a top-down analysis, and then we try and make that month-by-month progress, find the areas of their playing where they're kind of button up against barriers, and we try and work through those, So so far it's been really successful and very, very popular, and I have a ton of fun with it because I love sitting, as you know now from the last hour, bloody talking. Once you start,
Talking
can't
banjo.
stop.
We have a couple questions from some viewers I'd like to get to. One, Julie Colton is asking if you can show us those inlays close up, those inlays of your banjo.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
So they're.
Do you know what material that is?
It's turquoise. And
It's real. It's real.
It's real turquoise, yeah.
It's real turquoise. It's not a synthetic or anything.
No, real turquoise, and they are 2 Irish salmon.
Wow, that's cool.
The next topic close to my heart, fishing. We won't go there because otherwise we'll be here all night.
Terry Hill is saying, what are some good Irish bands to see or look up?
Oh, I would start with the classics like Dervish, Alton. They're the two great legacy bands that have been around for nearly 30 years, and their music is fantastic. I would go and listen, if you're into banjo, I'd go and listen to Solace, Seamus Egan's band.
How do you spell that?
Solace.
S-O-L-A-C-E?
Solas.
A-S.
I guess the Americans pronounce it Solas, but it's an Irish word that means light, solace. They're a fantastic band. Big favourites of mine would be Danann. So they're a Galway band with Frankie Gavin, who's the fiddle player, and they made some seminal recordings in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, like just absolutely groundbreaking. Fiddle with Bowron and Greek bouzouki. Accordion,
No.
Martin O'Connor, Jackie Daly. There was some of the best music ever recorded. And I mean, if you want to go right back and get a great kind of starting point in the education of Irish music, I'd go back and start with the likes of Planxty and the Bothy Band. I mean, they were the guys that are at the forefront of the folk revival in the 60s and the 70s, and they played amazing music, and they're still some of the most important recordings ever made.
Cool. Great. I also want to bring up We Banjo 3 released a new record this summer,
Hmm.
Opened the Road. Uh, what, how'd that, how's that doing? And it's a fantastic album, everybody. You should take a listen to it. And can you just talk about quickly about the concept of going into that album?
Yeah, it was funny. We had rehearsed a lot for it, probably more than any album that we'd ever recorded, because we had time during 2021 when we were at home. And then as touring opened up, kind of in late 21, the question was arising like, when are we going to find time to record it? Because we were looking at, you know, hardcore touring, because like everybody else, there was 2 years of cancelled dates and rescheduled dates and people that had held on to tickets for years and years. And so we were due to go on tour in January of this year. And then just because of a COVID surge, we had a 2 week tour that was pulled in kind of the West Coast and stuff.
Hmm.
And so we said, let's just go for it, you know. So instead of doing the tour, we flew out to Maryland and we went to our sound engineer Frank's studio and had 10 days, and we were done in 9, I believe. And then we re-recorded. So the title track is "Open the Road." It's a 7-minute piece of music that's different. One of the challenges that we set ourselves was that every night that we play it, it has to be different. So like there's a basic tune, and then the tune goes in multiple different ways depending on the mood of the night. So after playing that all the way through March on tour, it changed phenomenally from when we had recorded in the studio.
Hmm.
So we just hired a studio for an afternoon in Ann Arbor, Michigan, mid-tour. I went in and re-recorded that one.
Just
Um,
that tune.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah,
because it had developed so much just from playing
yeah.
it on the road, you know. So there's a bunch of fantastic guests. I mean, there's a friend of ours, Steve Ferrone, who drummed with Tom Petty. Like he's drumming on one of the tracks. He's a
Wow.
bona fide like rock and roll drummer.
All right.
We got Ryan Malloy's on keys. There's Abigail Washburn, I think, was probably my favorite guest. She's singing and playing clawhammer on a song called Garden Song. And it's kind of a funny story. I mean, what she does vocally on that song, only Abigail would have come up with it. You know, her harmony lines are
Right.
just so unusual and brilliant. But Bela was working on the track. So this this was the track that we tried over and over to record in the studio, and we just couldn't get the feel right. And we had a demo track when we had just barely knew the song, that we had recorded uh, in Galway, just on a Zoom, I think. And we kept going back to that recording and saying, look, the vibe on that, we just couldn't recapture it. So I says, why
Hmm.
don't we use this? And so I had a couple of fluff notes on the banjo, which I knew were there. And so when we had done our bit, we sent it to Bela, and he sent me an email going, I hope it's okay. I went in and isolated your banjo, and I just fixed a couple of those bum notes.
Wow.
Anyway, so there, yeah, you have
No,
Abigail singing and playing banjo. It's an awesome track, yeah.
yeah, cool. Well, it's a great recording, everybody. I'll definitely should take it out. It's available all the usual spots, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and this has been great. I have a huge list of things I wanted to cover, but we'd sit here for hours on end.
You just want to talk about fly fishing, don't you?
Really. Actually, there's another question here that came up just now from Alan Jones. He's asking, is We Banjo 3 likely to tour England anytime soon?
No.
Okay.
Not for any negative reason. Just
It's not a societal, political sort of thing going on.
There's just nothing on the horizon currently.
Okay. All right. Would you like to play one more tune, play us out as we
Sure. Yeah. Let's go with the crazy deep banjo for a little bit of fun. Put the bunch of green rushes, or will we? Short and sweet.